Hi there, welcome to Damage Algebra. I'm Jarrett, and this is the fourth devlog for my solo hobbyist game, Forward Operations. If you're new to the series, Forward Operations is a real-time strategy game that blends in elements from games like The Sims so that you have to take care of your soldiers. I've linked the full playlist for the series above if you'd like to go back and get fully caught up on all the details. Since I produce devlogs every 3 months, this one's more than just my fourth devlog. It represents 1 full year of development on Forward Ops. That's 1 complete year of balancing development with my full-time job, spending time with my family and friends, and working on a whole separate podcast project because I'm a crazy person. If I'm being honest, just surviving to this point feels like a huge win. So for this devlog, there are 3 things I'd like to cover. First, I'll provide a progress update on my attempt at rebuilding my own goal-oriented action planning system with what I learned from integrating Crash Conine's library last quarter. Second, I'll discuss how I've been refactoring and reorganizing the entire codebase, as well as why I've been doing that. And lastly, I'll reflect quickly on a full year of development and talk about what's next. Alright, that's enough intro. Let's get on to the updates. Okay, so in the last devlog I talked extensively about how awful the goal-oriented action planning or GOAP system that I built was, and how I integrated a much better library built and maintained by Crash Conine to replace it. That worked out pretty great, and I highly recommend the library to anyone interested in using GOAP in their game, but I learned a lot from this library and I wanted to try my hand at making my own again. The result is, unsurprisingly, very similar in approach to Crash Conine's system, with some specific tweaks for my workflow. The biggest change is that there's no centralized planning behavior. In Crash's library, all planning gets routed through a single mono behavior that every planning agent needs to reference. One of the main advantages of this is it puts all the things that need to happen across all the agents into one spot, which in turn allows for multi-threading operations with the job system. This is awesome, but it does create a tight coupling between game objects that I personally try very hard to avoid. The way I build my games, no game object knows about any other game object unless it's a direct child or parent. Basically, if the game objects come packaged together in a prefab, then they're allowed to know about each other. Otherwise, they interact with other objects through events or scriptable objects. So my system gives each object its own planner bound behavior that references a scriptable object that provides the planner logic shared by all the other agents. I do lament losing the job system in my implementation, and I'm pretty sure that's going to come back to bite me later. But that does lead me to my second big change that I made, which is to align planning operations with the tick system in Forward Ops. Since the beginning, I've managed the passage of time in the game with the tick system, which I currently have configured to run 5 ticks every second at normal speed. Most things in the game run per tick, not per frame, because running every frame just isn't necessary. What's more, every object in the game manages their own ticks, starting from when the game object is created. The result is that 2 different objects are running their ticks on completely different frames. This system is not an attempt at optimization, but it is a valuable side effect. So every agent in the game is planning at the same rate, but they're not on the same frames, and I hope for the typical amount of agents that I would expect to be active in the game at any one time, that this is going to spread the computational load fairly evenly across frames, and the loss of the job system won't be so painful. Of course, if it is, I would look for a way to integrate the job system into my own implementation, but at this stage, that would absolutely be falling into the premature optimization trap, so I'm not going to even go there. At this point, I'm not fully done with rebuilding my GOAP system, but it's about 90% of the way there. Much of the implementation borrows heavily from Crash's library, because imitation is the sincerest form of flattery. Again, I can't stress enough that you should check his library out if you want to use GOAP for your game, instead of rolling your own. One thing I've tried very hard to do with the rewrite is to abstract away how the planner interacts with the rest of the game, so in the future, when version 3 of Crash's library comes out of beta, I can do a quick integration and take it for a test run. But that's for another time. It turns out that rebuilding the GOAP system wasn't the only refactoring that I did. Over the past few months, I've basically rewritten the entire game from the bottom up. I didn't mean to do this at first, but it was just sort of the natural progression of my personal philosophy to tackling large development projects. There's a tension between wanting to just keep building new things and the desire to have a code base that is, maintainable. If I spend my time working at a lightning pace, I'm going to end up with spaghetti code. I'll have all kinds of different patterns and naming conventions and methodologies, and it will just be an absolute mess. At some point, I would find it to be such a pain to build something new on such a shaky foundation that I'll put the project down and go do something else, and then the project will be dead. So, to combat this, I alternate between periods of building new features and periods of refactoring code to clean things up and make the pieces fit better together. To put it in real-time strategy terms, I attack and take territory, and then I pause in order to solidify my position and improve my supply lines before I once again resume my attack. Part of this effort is to formalize the systems in the game. I've always been more of a framework developer, the kind of developer who likes to build libraries that other developers will use and build their presentation layers on top of. Over the past 3 months, that's the approach I've taken with my own code. I've separated my codebase into 2 main namespaces. The first namespace is forward ops, which represents the game specifically. All the code that's written just for this game goes into the forward ops namespace. From there, the code is organized by system and by function. The second namespace is damage algebra, which represents the systems that I've built that are not necessarily specific to forward ops. Code in this namespace is organized into packages with their own namespaces, and they generally do not know that the other packages exist, so there's no code shared between them. The intention was to build them like reusable libraries with solid APIs built around interfaces and dependency injection that make it easy to override any targeted part of the system. Any overrides or bespoke implementations for forward ops would go in the forward ops namespace because those are customizations specific to the game and not part of the library itself. The new GOP implementation is an example of a reusable system, but it's not the only one. The entity component data structure that I discussed in the second devlog is another example of a system that could easily be used in another game, so I've taken it out and I've made it cleaner and clearer. I also refactored a system I've built to allow scriptable objects to reset to their initial values when coming out of play mode in the editor if you opt into it. Lastly, there's a collection of extension methods that I find handy, so I've put them into their own package, and this one does get shared a little between the others. The benefit of all of this for me is that there is now a clear separation between the structural systems in my game and the game logic itself. So much of the code of my game was foundational groundwork, and having it so tightly coupled and mixed in with everything else was difficult to manage. By moving it out, I've taken large swaths of code that should, at least in theory, change very little if ever, and I've hidden it away where I don't really need to look at it. At the same time, I've re-engineered it to be reusable and extendable so that I can take it off the shelf in the future for some other project if I ever need it. It was a lot of work, and it's still ongoing, honestly, but it's the kind of activity that is force multiplying. I'm more likely to want to come back and work on this project, and when I do, it will be easier and faster to do so because the code is well organized, consistent, and clean. It's a huge win-win for me. Now, is this something you should do? That's hard to say. I do recommend at least giving it a try, especially if you've been having a hard time making long-term progress on projects. But I also think software development is a very personal activity, and you shouldn't listen to anyone who tells you that there's only one right way to do anything. Alright, so now that it's been a year of development, how am I feeling? Surprised is the first word that comes to mind. Considering how busy I am with work and friends and family, not to mention other projects that I have going on, I wasn't sure how much game dev time I would actually have over the past year. On top of all that, to actually deliver a year's worth of devlogs on the schedule that I originally planned, it's very surprising, but in a good way. It hasn't all been perfect, of course. I've definitely spent more time building or implementing goal-oriented action planning systems than I originally expected, but it is what it is. Even now, I'm resisting the urge to re-implement Crash Conine's library with my improved codebase. Maybe next year. There's a lot of work to do yet before this replica of The Sims and Army Fatigues begins to really resemble the game that's in my head, and even more work before it's something that I would consider giving to someone else to try playing. That said, I've learned a ton over the past year, and I'm confident that by building and refactoring at a realistic pace, that the project will take shape. There's a lot of new features I'm excited to start solving for example, forming individual soldiers into squads and having them work together to achieve tasks. Base building and managing supplies also at the top of my very long list of things to tackle. And finally, I'm very appreciative to everyone who has taken time to watch these videos, leave comments and likes, and especially to subscribe. I know these videos aren't going to win any awards anytime soon, but I'm very proud of this little series, and that anyone out there engages with my content at all lightens my load considerably. Thank you 1,000 times for sticking with me in this year of devlogs, and I'm excited for what comes next. Well, that'll do it for this devlog. A full year of development complete and some core systems in place. There's always going to be work on the planning engine, but that's at least in a good spot for the moment. The codebase is the cleanest it's ever been and primed for future development. And that altogether provides strong tailwinds for what's to come. I hope you're enjoying this series, and if you are, I would appreciate a like if you don't mind. If you'd like to keep up with the game's development or any future projects, feel free to subscribe. If you have any questions or if you have any suggestions on how I might improve, please don't hesitate to drop a comment below. Thanks for watching this latest devlog for Forward Operations here at Damage Algebra. Hope to see you at the next one. Take care.